All right, we're live now. Hey, everybody, I'm Soren, and I'm here with James Whelan. So this is the second episode of Featured Disabled. Welcome. How are you doing today?
Well, fine, thank you. Happy belated Global Accessibility Awareness Day.
Yes, thank you for reminding us. Yeah, I'm really excited because we've had a lot of fun stuff happen this week. Twitter released some cool new features. IBM Accessibility released a cool tool set. So we've got like a lot of cool new stuff that dropped from some major brands.
And are these things that you'll immediately be able to incorporate into your work?
Well, I think that for me, the IBM Accessibility is more like a tool I can share with other people because it's a lot of guidelines that maybe I've already known or picked up from like training at DQ. And it's some of the stuff is like a good framework for working with other people. And it's a lot of really great stuff that I can share, like I said. And then Twitter, definitely, they just improved accessibility for alt text. They increased the alt text character limit from 400 characters to 1,000, which is going to greatly increase the amount of space we have to write about like what's going on in the image and why people should care. And then they also added auto description for moving images. So if like a lot of people were really excited when they added GIF, whichever way you say it, they added descriptions for GIFs to their desktop and then very recently mobile, so you could describe your own. And that was really great, but then you have to remember to do it, which is less than optimal because a lot of people are just, not doing it. So when people like me are going through conversations that are mostly moving images, like let's say it's moving too fast or it's just not clear, then I'm relying on somebody else to describe it for me.
Oh.
Or if somebody's using a screen reader, then they have like absolutely no context at all. So that's definitely a drawback. But if they have like an AI that's at least giving them some sort of hint, and that can be done pretty easily, especially if somebody's using one of those auto inserters where they're searching for context. Like if you're searching for insert like supernatural GIF or something like that, and it's like I'm gonna insert, this character doing this face, then it can describe that for you, which I think is a really good way to just kind of cut the middle person out of the process.
Yeah, and get it in real time. Oh, how good are those AI descriptions nowadays? Like what kinds of things? What kind of feedback do they give you?
I haven't had a lot of testing on the new Twitter features yet, so I'm not really sure how that one is working, but I know that a lot of the quick picks that you can use for images or GIFs in social media apps use those. So you're just like uploading your favorite GIF and then you're searching through it, and it's already using a lot of AI. So I think they're pretty accurate already because they're recognizing people, or they're using like tagging to recognize either facial expressions or common themes. So I think they're pretty accurate already, but I would like to try out Twitter's and see like what kind of algorithm they're using, because it does really depend. I know there's been some problems with algorithms in the past that have like been a little bit racist, or they haven't been as inclusive as possible. Like they'll tag people with short hair as men. So, like they tend to be like very binary, or they tend to be like not very inclusive of gender nonconforming people. So, it still kind of remains to be seen what kind of inclusivity they provide, but it is better than nothing, I will say, because if you're just like sitting there looking at something that's completely blank and you don't know what's going on, just knowing that it's like a GIF of a hamburger can provide a lot more context to a conversation than not knowing anything at all. So I think that even if it's not perfect, it's still, don't let perfect be the destroyer of good, is something that a lot of people say, or the enemy of good, something to that effect.
No, absolutely not. And it's fascinating. This it's a growing area of all technology, really. And what you said about if they can capture the search keyword that I would use to find the GIF, then they can obviously give that same information back to the person that's using a screen reader. So that's pretty powerful.
Yeah, and I think that it depends on the person, of course, because like if I know something very specific that I'm searching for, like I really want like a certain character from a certain show, then of course that's not going to be as helpful, because if I'm searching for like someone from Community, there's a gif of somebody like walking in with a pizza and the whole room's on fire. If I'm looking for like that gif, that searching for that character's name doesn't really provide the same context as a person walking in and the room's on fire. So, there's kind of like this dichotomy of like, what do we associate with a certain show or a certain character or a certain scene, and what do we associate with a certain feeling or a certain abstract idea? So, we have like this cultural context around these separate ideas. And if sometimes if you're out of the in group, you don't have that context. So if you told me like, oh, it came from season 2, episode 1 of Community, then I don't really understand that, because I never watched that show completely through. So all I have is like some cultural, like pop culture byproducts of like seeing this stuff online. But if you were to tell like my partner that, they probably have watched a lot of Community and they know exactly kind of what you're talking about, but it's in group, out group kind of stuff. And then of course, like if somebody hasn't seen it, they may not understand what's going on in the show, so they may not understand the point.
No, well, it's fascinating to think of taking any one of those GIFs and extracting all the semantic content from it, and then concisely repeating it verbally. That would be in one sense, it would be a huge challenge for even a very intelligent person to do. You could write an entire graduate thesis on it. But on the other hand, just to give someone enough context to keep up with a conversation is fairly simple.
Yeah.
But at least when I think about the way I use those myself, there's usually just an emotion and maybe a pun, right? And
Right.
the burger gets you to both of those most of the time.
Yeah, I think for social media, we can be kind of a little bit more loose and fast with it. I wrote a social media guideline for doing more like publishing on social media. And one of the things that I wrote as advice was for people to go and watch Netflix shows with the audio descriptions turned on. There's one show, The Good Place, that has excellent audio descriptions. And when I was recovering from surgery, and also like while I was going through the waiting period for having surgery, and I'm completely blind, like dark blind in this eye. And so when I was blind in this eye as well, legally blind, I only had dark and light and some motion ability out of this eye. I had to listen to everything with audio descriptions, and the audio descriptions in The Good Place are really, really good because it gives you a lot of emotional context. And that's what the show is kind of about, is it's an emotional journey. There's some slapstick humor, but it's more about like what's going on with the characters and the interactions between them. And so like having the play by play of like somebody walking across the room or somebody like putting a drink down isn't so important, but like understanding like what kind of emotions are going across their face is really important. And by contrast, if you listen to like Sabrina, The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, everything is like so serious. And like there's not a lot of emotional depth described, even though I feel like having watched it cited and then having watched it non-cited both ways, I feel like there is a lot more emotional depth visually than there is in the audio descriptions. And so like when you're listening to the audio descriptions, every single emotion is their brow furrowed. Like concern is a furrowed brow, worry is a furrowed brow, anger is a furrowed brow. Like every single emotion, blow by blow, is like that. So I told people that they should listen to that with like turn the brightness all the way down and then listen to the good place. And they'll understand the difference in what makes good audio descriptions or alt text. Because like a lot of people, when they write alt text for Instagram or they're writing it for a blog post or some other kind of publishing platform, they'll write like, I must describe everything that everyone is wearing. And they have to describe how the sunlight is streaming across the meadow and all this other kind of stuff. And I'm like, just give me the context for how this picture relates to your content. Because otherwise, I don't really need the picture. Like, it doesn't really have any bearing. Like, two people holding hands, how does it relate to the content? Is it like an article about relationships, or is that an article about like hand sanitizing? Like, how does it relate? And that context is really important.
Oh, that's fascinating, because I'm thinking of this from the perspective of somebody being given a set of guidelines for turning an image into a description. And it would be possible, I'd imagine, to create such restricted guidelines that even if they wanted to tell you something else about the scene, they just had to say every time someone's brow furrowed, because that was one of the things that was on the form that they'd been given to fill out. So,
Yeah.
no.
And that's the thing. We were going to talk about tools today. That's the thing that just like killed me when there was a new tool that came out and somebody on Gizmodo wrote an article about it, and they were like, it's like autocorrect for accessibility. And I was like, there will never be autocorrect for accessibility because it requires critical thought. Like an AI can tell you what is in the picture according to like its algorithm. It can identify like, beep boop, there is a person in this photo, like Soren is wearing a very dark cranberry jacket, but it can't tell you like why it's important that I'm wearing glasses, or like what the significance of like this t-shirt is, or anything like that. Like it can't make those significant connections, which is why it's important to even have the picture in the first place.
Well, that's right. And with user accessibility in mind, there's at least some sort of objective that all the semantic content that you take out of the image can be oriented towards. So it's a little bit, it is actually possible to do correctly, rather than being almost like an exercise in art criticism. But from what you said, the importance of having accessibility included in the design process from the beginning is really highlighted by that, because then the relevance of each element of the image and the verbal description to the user experience will map perfectly, because that's how it was constructed. So it's not a remediation in that case. It's just an element of the design.
Yes, absolutely. I totally agree on that. That was something that I did really want to talk about today was, and I've been teasing that a little bit in my social media posts, is that remediation often leads us to this trap of thinking that we've made our products accessible, when in fact we've just retrofitted accessibility to our products. And just like you just said, if everything is lined up so that we're like, okay, well, this picture has a purpose and it's accessible and it has a purpose, to the user. It has a purpose that, I mean, because if you think about it, if somebody doesn't need the description of the picture, if it doesn't serve a purpose to illustrate anything, if it doesn't add value, if like a screen reader person user is going through it and they're like, I don't really need to listen to this whole description, like to understand anything, then why is it even there for sighted users? Like if it's not adding anything to hear about it, it's not really adding anything for sighted users other than just a little bit of eye fluff.
Right. And it is possible either visually or with a screen reader experience to create a web page that just bombards the user with an annoying amount of irrelevant information. And unfortunately, I found that when I've used screen readers myself to understand the experience better, it's very common to just have to bypass all of this. Basically, somebody shouting irrelevant numbers even at you, right? So
Yeah.
a huge long number in the description of an image, maybe by accident or negligently, and then that's essentially the kind of visual content that would give someone like me a seizure, but turned into a screen reader experience.
Yeah, for readers or listeners or uh we're gonna have transcripts of this, so that's why I say readers. For readers, listeners, or viewers that are following along with us, James and I both have different disabilities. So James has published a really cool article on Thursday for Global Accessibility Awareness Day about how epilepsy has really affected James's view of accessibility and how that has just opened a whole new world of understanding. And for me, I have a varying level of visual acuity depending on the day and the month. So I started losing my vision in 2016. And so over the last 4 years, I've had 10 different eye surgeries to save the left eye and to try to fix the right eye. But we're working on it. It's a work in progress. So different times, different things going on. So I've had cataract replacement or cataract removal, where they replace the lens, and different injections for macular edema. So you name it, I've probably had it done. But yeah, it's something that I had never thought about before. And I thought, as someone in my 30s, I had probably 30 to 40 more years before I ever had to think about it. And then I didn't. So I definitely had, I hate to use my eyes were opened because I know that that's such a bad metaphor for for visual issues. But yeah, I feel like people don't talk about the things that really brought around their awareness, and a lot of people they're just like maybe a little bit adjacent to it. But I think that having people that are involved every step of the way in designing things for accessibility. I mean, it's not even for accessibility, it's just so it's usable basically by everybody is so important, because once I started doing accessibility, I don't know if this has been your experience as well, James, but once I started doing accessibility awareness, I realized that almost no one else even had heard about some of the stuff that I was talking about. Like you were talking about rattling off a string of numbers, ARIA labels, and how many levels of hierarchy that people use in navigation was just like something that people had never thought about. So that's one thing that I feel like people can be very compassionate towards, and they can change the way that they think about these things, and they can change from having this remediation standpoint where we're creating these Frankenstein monsters of a product to going back to the SLED team approach, where we have accessibility and we have design and we have development all working together to create one cohesive product from the beginning and testing it with people that have disabilities. I mean, I feel like it's the bare minimum that we can do. But I feel like people are very compassionate to that, but they just don't know that it's a problem because it's never affected them.
Well, people who design things, even that they're not going to use themselves, are often very thoughtless. Like the classic example is the piece of hardware where all of the ports look the same. You have to have it oriented the correct direction in order to plug into the particular port. So there's a 50% chance of screwing it up. And all the buttons maybe will be the same color as the casing, you know. And that's exactly the same kind of thoughtlessness that leads to these, you know, annoying strings of numbers being used as image labels. It's simply, if you don't put yourself in the mind of the person that's going to use the product, you're going to come up with a bad design. And
Exactly.
yeah, and that kind of pain sort of adds up over the course of the day, right? You get it from everywhere. And so one of the things that I would challenge people to do perhaps is go back and use a computer that was made in the 80s and just see how awkward it was to use some of those early computer mice even. And I don't know if you have any occupational therapist friends that have like the collection of different computer mice for every human configuration. But that's another useful awareness exercise.
One of the things that I did once I started studying accessibility academically was I tried using my iPhone with different accessibility modes. Like, how do I use it in switch mode? So if I couldn't use my hands as dexterously as I can, like, how would I use my phone? Because there's a lot of people that have mobility challenges that they can't just use a phone as thoughtlessly as I can. Because even when I'm using voiceover, I'm just like swiping like a maniac. I just don't even think about it. I'm tapping and swiping, and I take that for granted. So if I couldn't do that, I would be even more limited in how I interacted with the world. And I think even if people were forced to use an old iPhone, they would find themselves frustrated. Like, if they had to go back a couple of gen from what they have now, they would be like, "Oh man, this thing's slow. I can't do what I want. Where are the features that I want?" And they don't realize that when you can't even, maybe do a long press, or you have to figure out how to, with voiceover, you can't do all the things that you would do as a sighted person, with like even just getting to the home screen with a buttonless phone. So with like the iPhone with swiping up from the bottom, it's just different. You have to like wait for the haptic feedback, and there's just a whole different way of using the operating system. So it's one of those things where I realized that I had to change how I was using my equipment pretty quickly to accommodate my disability. And then I realized, wow, there's other people out there that are having to change how they're using their equipment as well. So how can I understand how they're having it to accommodate? And that led me down a whole different path. And I think that people don't understand how time intensive it is to learn, and they don't understand how effortful it is. And so, there's a fine line between like being like, oh, like, yay, people that have disabilities, like, good job for, like, getting out of bed and being a human today. Like, you're so inspiring. And appreciating and designing things in a way that acknowledges that challenge and honors it, and says, like, I'm going to do everything that I can to make sure I design things that accommodate you. and that allow for you to have a little bit more ease. Because one is kind of on the inspiration porn side, where I'm like, oh yay, go. Like, you haven't given up on life yet. And one is like, I want to enable you to the best of my ability because I'm like charged with making things usable. So you've got like these two ends of the spectrum where I find one really empowering and one to be kind of like a little infantilizing. So some people really get it. And I've had like a couple of really great people in my life that have been abled people that have been that voice of saying like, yeah, let's make things that you can use. And that's been great. So I always treasure those sorts of people.
Well, I think one of the signs that our civilization is advancing is that we're, a higher level of awareness is thinking about how somebody else feels, and that and also thinking about thinking. And the emergence of the user experience design field is a symptom of a trend that I'm seeing in society where people are thinking more about not just how the game works, but how the rules of the game affect the way that we play the game, or in this case, how the way that the people use the product. And so one of the challenges in user experience design is it's a sort of an emergent discipline based on a higher level of awareness about how other people are thinking and interacting with products. I read yesterday actually that the reason why oxen were used for labor for as long as they were was actually because the yoke that was invented initially was choking horses, and therefore horses couldn't ergonomically uh, pull the plow with their full strength. And it took thousands of years to invent a collar you could put on a horse that would allow it to use its full physical potential. But when it did, it totally revolutionized agriculture. And nowadays, we're used to changing our chairs whenever our backs hurt. But that's actually a fairly new idea, and that kind of thing is something that humans have apparently a really hard time appreciating.
That I've never even considered that before because, I guess I take for granted that you know, I don't feel comfortable with the height that my desk is, so I get a standing desk and I stand when I'm comfortable and I use risers and stuff to make sure that my laptop is the right height. And it almost seems like it's a human right at this point. Like if you don't feel comfortable with your workstation, it's not ergonomically suited, then you get an accommodation. So it almost seems like that sort of thing, the ergonomics even is just kind of standard now. Like sometimes people don't even ask you for accommodation. They're just like, yeah, we got some standing desk over there in the back. Like just go grab one.
Yeah. Well, I'm 32, and so I don't know how old you are, but if you were 32, you'd be right at the stage where you could still remember being 5 years old and hearing someone say, "Oh, your back hurts. Who cares? Use the same chair everyone else is using," you know. And that attitude caused an enormous amount of pain and premature aging, but it it's typical of the transformation that the internet has really helped us go through. That we're moving away from that. Connecting with all the people that also have the back pain and understanding, wait a second, no, it's just a consequence of being human and sitting in this chair. It's the chair's fault, really, right?
Yes.
And
Yeah,
it's
it's
not the whole
not the
fault.
humanist's fault.
Yeah, right. um, and now when I look at it from this perspective, I was actually just on a farm, and you can see how the perceptual systems of all the different farm animals affect their behavior and how you have to interact with them and feed them and make them comfortable. And so you would think that someone who is involved in agriculture would be the first person that would notice. the horse needed a different color. But again, thousands of years.
Yeah, we have trouble with change, I think. It's why like some of our conventions have stayed around for so long. It's why we still have some really wacky laws, especially in the South. Like there's some really weird ones about watering lawns and like not wearing bathing suits on like certain days. I don't know. There's a whole list online. I'm sure that people can find it if they're really interested in it, but there's some really weird laws. But yeah, that's why we have some trouble with change. And then once things are in place, we're just like, maybe we just leave it like that because yeah, it's been like that for so long.
Just a moment.
Yeah.
可以当一会儿再细盘子。Sorry.
So
Go ahead.
oh, I was gonna say we had like two things that I really, really wanted to talk with you about, which was one, designing for cognition. Because I know that so like I personally I have ADHD. I don't consider it to be a disability. Some people would consider neurodivergence to be something that is disabling for them. I just consider it a difference, and there are some other like cognitive disabilities that you can design for. So I did want to get to that and say like let's talk about designing for cognition.
Well, I think that's an excellent topic, and the more we think about the mind, the more clearly we're able to see every aspect of experience design, because that's what it really comes back to. So if we can get the cognitive element of user experience design right, then we might actually be able to tackle this problem. The the issue for me is that the brain has large numbers of important capacities, and which one of them is brought to bear on the element of the, the product or the web page that you're designing is it's an interaction between the user's mind and the way that you've designed it. So you're trying to draw their attention to various parts of the page in a way that gets them where you want them to be, but also makes them feel comfortable, right? And so, depending on which parts of their mind are most sensitive to particular stimulus, it's going to affect whether a web page, gives them a seizure or amazes them with its, attractive colors. And part of that has to be, first of all, avoiding things that cause acute problems, but also allowing people to control their experience a little bit more. Things like being able to change the rate at which a picture refreshes with another picture, or being able to go to a black and white mode if the colors are overstimulating. One thing that interested me is that a friend of mine has attention deficit disorder, and one of the benefits of that, of course, is he's very good at noticing things like that are in the periphery of his vision, which of course that's a skill. And if someone were to give me a test to see how much I could perform that task, he would score much better than I would. But he found if you just remove the color red or any kind of bright color from his environment, his ability to concentrate improved dramatically. So giving him the ability to do that, uh, it's just like allowing him to choose what kind of chair he sits in.
Yeah, I agree. I think that also, thinking about like how we not only like design things, but design services and how we operate together as teams, even like those are experiences as well. And I've just been having a conversation with someone this week talking about how we work together as a team and thinking about how we reach out rather than reach in. So say like somebody's having an issue with performance, instead of saying like, I've decided for you what what the solution is, being able to reach out to them and say, how can I support you? Because oftentimes people know what kind of support they need, and we just need to like listen to them. It's just like user research. We just need to listen to them and see where we can meet them halfway, rather than being like, hey, I've decided this is what you need to do to like to be a part of this team, rather than it. And I feel like that's a lot of what conflicts on teams are about, is we don't have the right like APIs to kind of like interact with each other. So when you introduce like a new teammate, or you introduce a new force to the team, or a new stressor like COVID, you're introducing like this whole new element, and it kind of offsets the balance, and it causes these misses in communication, or it causes a miss in like expectations between teams. Like if you're working with a new team, like you've got like a product team and a new development team, and maybe it's a scrum team you haven't worked with before, and you just like don't have the language to talk to each other. So there's a lot of definition that needs to happen. There's a lot of asking that needs to happen, a lot of scoping that needs to happen. And so there's like this scaffolding that you have to build. And then you have to ask people like, how can I support you if you notice that there's something that like you aren't able to meet them at a place where it seems like you're on an even playing field. And I've noticed, like, especially with people that are neurotypical and people that are neurodiverse, that it seems like it's a really hard place to find an even ground, because like a lot of people that are neurotypical expect you to like read between the lines, or to function exactly the same way that they do. And they don't understand like auditory processing disorders, or like even sensitivities to sound, or like you were saying, like different sensitivities to patterns or colors. Or like these Zoom meetings are really hell for some people that are now working remotely from home, because it's so hard to concentrate, or it's hard to like have all this screen time when they didn't have that before. Maybe they were getting up and walking around the office and talking to their coworkers, and now they have to like be really regimented and schedule their time, and that doesn't work as well for some people. So and for me that works really great, because I like to be really regimented and I like to not be interrupted. So I like knowing that like I have until like 3 o'clock, and then I have like a meeting right then. But for some people, it doesn't work as well. So there's all these different ways that we can kind of like design our team interactions. And there's all these ways we can do that with users as well. But I think part of the thing is that we don't realize that there's these misses that are happening. And users don't want to be like, hi, I have this cognitive thing that you're not designing for, because it's still such a taboo subject that people don't want to even ask for accommodations at work, much less ask the company that is making their products, can you accommodate me?
No, it's true. It's based on the sort of, uh, for lack of a better word, primitive assumption that there's a sort of standard, reasonable way to communicate, and that a reasonable person would be able to accept information if it was presented in a certain way. And that's an idea that is sort of drilled into us in elementary school because of the limitations of the classroom and class sizes. You just have to create rules that get you to where you need to be, and then underpin that with the assumption that it's possible to follow the rules. And that's a very inflexible user interface for the child or for the teacher. And we've built our sense of what's appropriate on a world where there there was no flexibility in user interface, and things stayed steady, right? It's been very mind expanding to just have multiple operating systems and multiple web browsers, just to see that one is slightly better than the other. And eventually, with all these tools, all these apps, all these ways of communicating, we're seeing the differences between them produce differences in performance, and we can no longer hang on to the illusion that it's a particular person's fault for not being normal enough, which is wonderful. I think it's making life better in many ways for everyone. But the other thing I wanted to touch on is that when we start talking about user experience design and accommodations, and especially in this cognitive category, we often come back to workplace issues rather than interactions between a customer and a business. And it's interesting to me, as someone who has a legal background, that the American with Disabilities Act is thought of as an employment statute, but it also has a lot of bearing on user experience design. What we're really seeing is a trend, a sort of an attempt to make the world a fairer, more inclusive place for people within institutions, whether they're paying money or being paid money. And we need to start looking at it in that perspective, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that it's hard for us to even think about starting to build inclusive products if we're not using inclusivity on our teams and we're not using that empathy and compassion. Because to me, if we're not doing that with the people that we see every day, and we're not like flexing that empathy, I know with people that we should probably care about what happens to them because they're our coworkers or they're somebody that we should have some vested interest in their success because they're part of the company that our success is also riding on, even if we don't care about them as people. Like, let's say we just don't get along. We don't have to get along with everybody that we work with, but let's say we do have some vested interest in their success because their success equals our business's success. Everybody succeeds. Rising tide, all those, that sort of thing. If we're not exercising that kind of empathy towards each other, I just don't see how we can exercise it towards customers that we only meet maybe a couple of them during user testing.
And you can't design an effective product unless you acknowledge the way that external forces and internal differences interact to create an experience. And so if your entire mentality is based on trying to either funnel as many people as you can into some sort of normal status and then remediate anyone who falls outside of that cone, then you're just hopelessly lost when it comes to doing anything interesting or productive, first of all, but also, of course, creating an accessible and inclusive design.
Yeah, remediating people is a good way of putting it, because I feel like that, like, normalizing of people, that it's impossible to, like, it's impossible to do that. It's impossible to be like, well, I'm just going to normalize you. Like, I'm just going to make you just like everybody else. It's just, there's too much diversity in the world to, I mean, who even decides what's normal? Because it varies so much from geography and age. Like, there's just too many variables. And with globalization, some of our companies are serving so many different audiences and segments that it would be impossible to decide, like, what is normal. Like, we can't even, there's not a demographic. There's multiple demographics.
That's true. Actually, I just came from the home of a friend of mine who lost his hearing completely in his 30s, around the time that some of us were losing our ability to watch Kanye West music videos or see, or whatever the thing is. But he he of course is very he's a great advocate for creating transcripts and subtitles and closed captions and things like that. But he pointed out to me is like, if the person is not speaking your language, then you get as much value out of all these transcripts and captions as I do.
Hmm.
So really, the fact that we don't already have this is just a symptom of having sort of self-segregated into linguistic groups. And the only reason we did that is because we didn't have the captions, which we say we don't need because we've segregated ourselves. And so this
Yeah.
is, as we gain the ability to add information to media to make it usable from for one group of people, we're gaining the tool to sort of make more information accessible to everybody.
Yeah, that reminds me of the Microsoft the accessibility and inclusivity diagram that has like the situational, temporary, and permanent disabilities, where it has like, for hearing, maybe being in a crowded place or being on mass transit and you don't have your headphones, like being able to watch a video with subtitles is accessibility for that situation. Having an ear infection and not being able to hear temporarily, that's a temporary disability, and then being like permanently hard of hearing or having hearing other kinds of hearing loss or deafness is, like the permanent disability there, which you would need an accommodation for, or you need that accessibility. And so
That's
you
true.
have all, yeah.
My favorite one of those was like, no matter who you know, how able-bodied you are, everyone has one usable arm some of the time at most, right? Because there's a picture of the woman holding the child on the subway, and I
Yeah.
thought that's true. I take it for granted that I have two hands at my disposal, and I feel grateful for it. But actually, that's not always true.
Right.
In fact, there's been times when I've injured myself because I thought I had two hands available and I didn't.
Yeah.
So it's
Oh
just
man,
serious stuff.
I hit my hand so hard the other day on the edge of a mirror, and I've been having a hard time typing this week because of it. And I'm just like, sometimes we really take for granted our abilities, and then, something happens to like we have an injury, and you know, it just it's you realize that like some of these like tech offices and stuff, like I sprained my ankle, can't there's no automatic openers on the bathroom, so I'm just like standing there waiting for somebody to come like open the door and let me into the bathroom.
Right, right. And but it's just wonderful that now organizations are starting to take responsibility for thinking about these things
Absolutely.
and knowing about them, and our our ability to deal with the challenges, because there are uh, apart from the awareness, there is a big technical challenge to making things accessible, especially something like a constantly changing website. You know, we have to we have to discover and build the tools to act on our improved intuitions.
So yes, and I have been beta testing your tool, and I am excited about the improvements that y'all have been able to make to it, with the user paths. That has been like a really, just a kind of a game changer actually, because I have used a bunch of different tools to like go through and do screen reader testing, or to like do just like any kind of automated testing, but having like different user paths to be able to use is really just kind of a game changer. So what do you want to tell everybody that's listening right now a little bit about what y'all are doing right now with in like anything that's cool that's coming out soon?
Well, I think that the thing that I'd most like to talk about is just the fact that our tool Aqua is based on the hope that eventually web accessibility becomes part of the design cycle,
Mm-hmm.
and we start thinking about accessibility not in terms of guideline conformance, but in terms of user journeys and just this exactly the same standards of usability that we apply to you know all good user experience design. And so what we're trying to provide is something that will help someone who wants to create a great user experience with a simple and enjoyable user journey. Make sure that as they're designing that, they're designing something that is what they want it to be for all of their customers, or for anyone who uses the design. And is one of the ways that we've done that is by allowing people to test in terms of user journeys, and of course the other is creating reporting in a format that's relatively easy to act on and take take advantage of on a team basis. Because unfortunately, a lot of web accessibility audits are not very user friendly. That they provide the data or the remediation suggestions in a huge spreadsheet or some sort of ambiguously worded text document, and then it doesn't fit very well into the workflow. And as you know, as a user experience designer, if something is unpleasant to use, people avoid it, and that ends up in exactly the same sort of remediation cycle that we were trying to avoid in the first place.
Yeah, and a lot of the user testing or the like different accessibility testing things are very obviously built by developers for developers. And so it's very hard for user experience people to use them and to be able, if they don't have any coding experience, to be able to weigh like, oh, is this accessible? Like, what is wrong with it? Like, I'm getting some sort of flag on this. What is it telling me? So I found that sometimes it's almost been better to not even manually check it, or to, I'm sorry, let me rephrase that. It's almost been better to manually check it, because the reports are just like not really usable. It's kind of like how people say like, oh, XJR is really powerful, but it's not user friendly. So it requires a lot of knowledge that takes a lot of time to build. So maybe I would just rather do something like code it myself. So that's kind of where I landed, and where some of the team landed, is that we took some of the other, when I was building an accessibility team before, we took some of the existing tools and we just modified them to run and do the things that we wanted them to do, and then present them how we wanted them, rather than using like some of the tools that are built out of the box for this sort of thing. But this seems like the solution for a team that maybe doesn't want to invest the time in building their own tool or modifying their own tool, because and also for teams that maybe want their designers to be able to have access to this, because I think designers need to be able to work more closely with developers, especially on accessibility, because there's so many things that they need to be in lockstep on for accessibility. It's not just a developer problem. And a lot of companies are treating it like a developer problem. Like, we'll just fix the HTML and it'll be fine. But there's so many things like designing for cognition, like the UX writers need to be on board for designing for like cognition, and for people that speak English as a second language, like making sure everything is at the level that it can be understood. Then you have to have like components that are made so that they can be designed in a way that can be understood. So UX designers need to have buy-in on that, and they need to be involved in that. It doesn't just need to have good semantic HTML. And a tool can check for good semantic HTML, but a designer needs to go back through and be like, okay, hey, but the design pattern needs to be like this. So I think that design needs to be a part of this tool, and they need to be part of the process in general. And I think that this was one of those things that they could use this, but I don't know if they could use all of the other tools that are out there. So it definitely brings something different to the table. So
Well,
I really liked it.
I'm glad to hear that, because clearly you're someone who's thinking along the same lines as we are, as far as if the user experience designers and the developers aren't working in lockstep, they they can only work against each other, and that doesn't help anyone. Do you manage a team that comprises both of those functions?
So not at the moment. Right now, I'm doing design advocacy. So mostly I'm working on doing some research and also working on community outreach. I am in the past, I have been working on co-managing a team that was designers and also like helping to advise a team that was designers and developers. So it was more of like a cross-functional team. We had designers and developers that worked together on like a systems team, and then we had a lot of designers, and there was another person who actually is going to be on my next episode, who is now the program leader there from at E-Trade. And we created this program from scratch and started doing remediation, and also started the program of, we want to do everything from the ground up. So here's like the social media guidelines for marketing. Here's like the guidelines for building things when we start a new project. Here's the guidelines for redesigns. Here's where we want to be over the next year. So we started, I guess it was May of 2019. And so we were hoping that by this year, we would be to the point where we weren't doing any remediation anymore, and that we were doing only new work or redesigns, and that we had no more remediation tickets. So that was a big ask. And we had some, and I know that Connor, who's going to be on the show next week, had some new hires that came on after I left to help take care of the backlog, and also to be the new experts, the champions for accessibility. So it was an amazing experience to be able to build something like that from the ground up in an institution that had absolutely no accessibility before we started. So that's one of those once in a lifetime opportunities, I think, to get something off the ground like that.
No, that's wonderful, and I I'm really interested in hearing about that experience, because at UsableNet, one of our boasts, one of the things that we say is that we can make web accessibility consistent with DevOps.
Yes.
Right? And the reputation is that, the intricate interactions that have to occur within a DevOps team are disrupted by the remediation aspect of web accessibility. But in fact, the whole concept of DevOps is perfectly consistent with having something like web accessibility being built into the design process. That's exactly the sort of synergy that it's designed to take advantage of.
I
So,
agree. I think that I think that if you realize that you haven't been baking it in, you absolutely start remediating, but you have to start somewhere, and you have to decide what your strategy is going to be for stopping the cycle of remediation. And sometimes that means that remediation has to run a little bit slower, because you have to also be educating everybody on the team to at least have this like base level. So we kind of decided like what would the base level would be, and then like who our champions were going to be. And people that were interested in being champions, we got them trained up as well and worked on at least exposing everyone to these ideas. And then remediation did run a little bit slower because we were also working on trying to get everybody up to speed. But that's one of those things where you have to decide to stop the cycle. And to get out of that loop, you have to make a couple of sacrifices. So Connor is an amazingly talented developer, and it was really good to be able to partner with him on on that, because I would not have been able to lead a development team because I just don't have the coding background to do it. I know like this much code, and Connor knows like this much code. So, it's a really good partnership. And I think that the relationship that we had was a really good example of how design and development can work together, because we both had like a lot of respect for each other, and we let each other have like our own zones of expertise, and where we could collaborate, we really did. And I think that is like the perfect way that design ops and DevOps can work together.
No, well, that's going to make for a wonderful conversation next week. I'm looking forward to tuning in.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it, because also it's been a while since I've been able to talk with him. So being able to catch up and see what he's up to is going to be great. But yeah, I absolutely 100% think that having the right tools and then also having the right relationships is just really integral to having this relationship where you're not doing remediation. And I think that Aqua has a really good potential. So I meant to ask you, are you looking for anything from our listeners slash readers slash watchers right now, or are you just looking to let them know about it? Are you looking for any testers or anything like that?
Well, yes, if you're watching this and you'd like to play around with some of the features we discussed and see if this can help you to do usability, the what we would be considered to be the right way, then absolutely, like, message me on LinkedIn, and I'll try to get you either some information or a software license so that you can try it out. The other thing is, if anybody heard something I said and they just have a comment about how I could be more aware, or some issues that I need to pick up on, I'd appreciate feedback on that as well. But and by the way, thank you for saying nice things about my my little Global Accessibility Awareness Day blog. The one thing I didn't mention is that the something about the way that all those seizures affected my brain disabled my ability to emote the way that I used to. So if I came across not as excited as I could have been, it's only because I have this bizarre affect. Like, I feel I'm projecting enthusiasm, and it's not coming across. But yeah, I'm glad to participate in this historical second episode. By the way, I'm looking forward to watching this.
No, I think you're fine. I feel like there's a lot of stuff to be really excited about here, and I think that you don't have to be worried at all about how you come across, because you're totally fine. I did just add your LinkedIn to our link tree. So if people are watching this and want to get in touch with you, I put the link to your LinkedIn there. So they can get in touch with you directly from our link tree.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah. So again, I know that we're a little bit over time, so I want to be respectful of your time. Did you have anything else that you wanted to talk about before we wrap?
Oh, no, that we covered a lot, and I now all I have are questions that I can answer by watching your next installment, because it sounds like you're going to talk a lot about your journey as a user accessibility advocate.
Yeah, and I'm gonna get Connor to talk a lot about his. So we'll have a variety of good perspectives. So all right, so yeah, that's a good segue into next time on Feature Disabled. We'll have Connor Franklin from E-Trade, who's going to talk about a lot of different accessibility stuff. We're going to talk about development for all the developer nerds out there. And well, I'll be talking a bit about design for all my design friend nerds. And yeah, we'll have a good time. I'll be posting a little bit more about maybe some of the content that we'll be talking about online. And also, we'll be having Ally Project on the first week of June, and we'll be having Cat Noon as well from Get Stark. So in the second week of June. So we've got a really great lineup so far for the next couple of weeks, and I'm excited. I hope everybody else is. And also, if you want to ask questions, don't be afraid to drop questions in the box. We will, even if we're talking, we'll pause and get to them as soon as we finish our collective thoughts. Uh, thank you so much for joining me, James, and thanks to everybody else that's been watching. I really appreciate it.
It was a pleasure. I hope we speak again soon.
Yeah, we will. I'll see you on LinkedIn.
See you.
Bye.